Okay, it looks like everybody who was in the waiting room is in, so we'll go ahead and get started. We always have people joining us, so we'll get started and hope they can catch up with us. So welcome to today's NTAC session entitled Put Your Seatbelt On. It's not what you expect. We're so happy that you're taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to go over with you, but we would love to learn more about you in the chat box. If you could take a minute and enter your organization, your role, and where you're located. If you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, I would really appreciate it. It helps us know where we need to focus our marketing and to try and get more participation. So please, if you would do that, I would appreciate it. Okay, this presentation was prepared by NTAC under a cooperative agreement from SAMHSA. The views of today's presenters are theirs alone and do not necessarily reflect the perspectives of SAMHSA or NTAC. So if we experience a security issue, this session will end immediately and you'll receive a separate email with further instructions. Never had that happen, but I have heard of it happening. So I guess that's as good. Thank you again for attending one of our sessions. Listed here are all of the incredible national partners that have come together to utilize their expertise and their subject matter knowledge to help inform the field by creating products, resources, and sessions like this one to enhance the behavioral and mental health fields. As a center, our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. We serve a wide cross-sector audience, including everyone from state leaders to providers to school, workforce, infant and early childhood providers, community-based providers, peer supervisors, family partners, youth partners, and much more. Our services range from individual consultation to more in-depth sessions like the one we are offering today. To peer learning exchanges and tools to help you. Our aim is to really create those outlets for communication, collaboration, and resource sharing amongst all of us. Please also make sure to check out all of our resources and archived presentations on our website, or go to contact us, the link contact us there to request consultation or training. And those links will be at the end of the slides, and you'll get a copy of all these slides. So you'll get that, but here it is, the website, if you want to go there or need to know. So after the event, you'll receive an email with a certificate of completion, a copy of the slide deck, and a link to the recording. Now that we've made it through our housekeeping items, we want to welcome you again to today's session. We're very excited to have Mary Viano talk to us from, I used to call it PPAL, but I think it's called PAL now, right? In Massachusetts. And I'm going to let her take time to introduce herself. This is Mary. She's the Associate Director at PPAL, and I will turn it over to you, Mary.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you all for attending today's session. I will make pauses throughout the conversation that we're having and would encourage anybody to raise their hand or be interactive. If you've got questions also in the chat box, I'm sure that Lori can also ask me the questions if you're uncomfortable kind of speaking up or not, in a place that you can't speak up. So really excited to join with you. we're going to start just kind of, as a whole. I love the introductions for our agenda today. Just again, thank you and welcome to having this live conversation of the experience, but also my experience in the 20 years of working in the field as a peer. So very excited that you're here. We'll go to the next slide, Lori. The goals and objectives I'm going to talk about, we'll talk about mental health, and I'm going to really talk about that. That's when you put your seatbelt on. It's not what you expect in your family. It's not something you plan for, and often it's something that happens to many families like mine. We're also going to talk about my kind of metaphor of a PTO meeting and talk about that. The goal is really to talk about what has been an impact to my family, my children, my grandchild, of what's also helpful and harmful. And then we will go into kind of the road trip to make things change. There's every opportunity and every place that you are to offer change for families that you support, for people that you are maybe directly as a peer. And one piece to really remember is we didn't create the systems that we're working in, but we have an ability to shift the systems that we're working in to do better by families. So I hope that we can take a little bit of action time in talking about that. Next slide. So goals and objectives, really to learn the impact of the journey that I've had from my perspective, from my children's perspectives. I will often quote my adult children, and I'll talk about a little bit of the permission that I received to also quote them, of loving somebody that was in the juvenile justice system and then as a young adult was also incarcerated. Also, just again, that helpful and harmful, that's wording that we use. We do have, shout out to Youth Move National. Really excited that they're one of the partners. We have a Youth Move chapter, and that's the language that we've really kind of adopted from Youth Move in our family organization of what's helpful and harmful. So we'll talk a little bit about that, both from the court perspective, in police and probation and a few others. Really to kind of hear ideas of how to strategize to infuse the family perspective. All of you know the buzzword that's out there on family engagement. It's a term, but a lot of people don't know how to get there. So I'll hopefully give you some highlights also in that. We will look at data that really needs to be looked at when shifting the juvenile justice world, and then also end in the message of what can we do together as families and people within different systems to really elevate the voice. So we'll go from there. So we are going to jump into the next slide. PAL, as Lori had mentioned, our website, and we'll put it you'll have the information also, is ppal.net. So I'll put that in the chat box or have a support person put that in there. We're a statewide grassroots family run organization. By definition, that means that 51% of our board has lived experience with raising children with mental health needs. We are at almost 99% as far as really our board being family members. I'd say almost 100% really. In our organization, we are 100% connected to mental health and other systems. So either individuals themselves identify and or are parents of, siblings of, children of people that have had experienced in mental health and behavioral health needs. Our goal is really to promote people to become leaders in their community. I think that's really exciting when you think about family organizations across the country. And I know that Fredla really represents a lot of those organizations where we kind of know what's going on and from our perspective of what's working and not working. So if you don't know family organizations, I would encourage you. They're one of the best gifts in your community, and they're across the states. And then the last thing, just, we are a member of Fredla, Justice for Families, which we'll talk about, the Federation for Families, Family Voices, and also we're a statewide family network grant and are funded through SAMHSA. Next slide. So what brings me here to really talk with you today as we pull up this next slide is I am here because of my children. I was an educator and went to school for something completely different than before I landed in a family organization and worked my way up as the associate director. The image that you see on the right-hand side is my middle son. He is the one that has brought me to this field, though all of my children have been impacted with mental health and or trauma. My oldest son brought me here at the age of 5. I knew something was different, something was going on. Wasn't sure what it was, but knew that something just wasn't kind of making sense. I often say that we're a very blended family. My perspective today will be very blended. I have a diverse family, mixed both cultural and ethnicities and races. I do identify as a mom that's a lesbian, so LGBTQ is very close to my heart, and the way that that's looked at in systems is also a concern sometimes. Um, and I also am just going to really bring in that I get to define my family. So, though you see 3 kids right here, I actually had 4 children, one that had passed away in my home as an adult. And then I have an additional 3 grandchildren, one of which I'm raising, which is 3 years old. And I often say, and though they're not in the pictures, I have 6 bonus children. The 6 bonus children of who I have identify as a young man that at 21 died of suicide. Another young man who is waiting for his sentencing, and I apologize as the emotion comes up, who I have really been connected to. A young woman that nobody thought would get out of a psychiatric hospital and is a mother and married with a 2 year old. Another woman that I just attended a wedding for over the past weekend and I consider family. A young woman that was told while she was in juvenile justice that she really wouldn't be anything and she would be in adult prison, graduated with her master's in a social degree and is actually working for a high foundation to make changes. I have another young person that identifies as trans, and though not accepted by her own family, I would say that I accept her and see her as one of my bonus children. I encourage all of you to allow the families that you support or the family that you are to define themselves. It is probably one of the best gifts and lessons that I've figured out. So often I say that this is my beginning ship of the pictures you see, but my blended family that I've mentioned is who I consider and I get up every day to work for. Not only do I work for them in trying to make changes and making changes for families that just don't know what they don't know, or system folks, there's no quick alphabet soup given to you or a manual to read. I want to continue to do the teaching to make it better for all families. It's one of the pieces that I continue to go to. As I talk about my middle child, like I had mentioned, you see him in the blue shirt with the tie. He is a child that had told me, though he was the easiest, my daughter, as you can see, has Down syndrome from the picture. Things didn't change. I didn't go through additional diagnoses. She had a feeding tube and she has Down syndrome. And boy, did everybody accept me. The empathy was immediately there and the connection was immediately there that, wow, you are a great mom. For my children that had, and my daughter has trauma as well, but my sons that had trauma that acted out in different ways, there was judgment. There were not doors held open for me. And there were people that made comments, whether I was at the supermarket or I was at the post office. There was constantly things being made or said about my children and about me as a parent if we were at the playground. Because trauma impacts children differently and trauma impacts their parents differently. But what I also want you to really hold on to, and this is my perspective, but I'm in a group of advocates that this is their perspective as well. We are not out of a pandemic yet. Trauma and grief are 2 different things. So, though my family has had trauma, there's been significant grief that continues to come up differently, and you can't see it on the outside of a person. So, as you're supporting people as they're trying to figure out their new village of supports and connections, please keep in mind that grief is the additional layer of the onion that nobody understands. That's something that is extremely hard to be able to support. Next slide. So, mental health, as we talk about and really take in, this photo is a photo of me holding a phone. It's a real photo. Now, my child was missing for 6 months. And I continued to sleep with the phone in my hand because I tried to figure it all out. What I didn't understand in mental health was two things that I know many of you support people or you have your own journey with mental health. It is very different than medical health. You don't get to stay in the hospital with your loved one. I didn't expect that when I brought my child in for his first psychiatric evaluation at 9 years old. I didn't realize that my bags wouldn't pack and I would move in just like that medical kid that you support. It was an unknown to me. I also didn't realize that in our state, I would be waiting 14 to 18 hours to even talk to somebody to assess what was going on in the brain. So for me, it stirred up a lot of challenges. It stirred up the immediate advocacy of why is this happening? In terms like boarding, expedited process, evaluation for risk was something that was completely new to me. I would encourage, and one of the things that was very helpful for me was somebody explaining what was going on in the process. So mental health can be complex. The diagnoses change, the symptoms change, but most of all, I want you to understand that as a family living in a home, it changes and shifts. And at times I adapted and didn't know I was adapting for survival. So my oldest child will often say, Mom, remember when you had made that basement bedroom for me with no windows, no doors, because I was so afraid? And I say, yes, I do. Do you remember soon after that, that's when I went to group care? I said, I do. I was adapting to try to survive, but what I didn't realize is that we would walk into places and there would always be windows and doors, right? Because I was trying to survive. But I also didn't know how to explain that to the individuals and the professionals that were supporting me so that there wasn't judgment and there wasn't blame and shame. Because remember, I'm a 2-mom family. There's been significant trauma in our home and we're trying to figure it out. One of the pieces when I talk about systemic trauma, and this can kind of get people a little bit on the edge, systems don't hurt people because that's the way it's meant to be, but it's the way that has been built, right? So one of the things I often say in psychiatric mental health emergencies, I didn't realize that all of my belongings would be stripped from me and I would be put in a small room with no windows when I waited for an evaluation. So the trauma that it took to stay there 48 to 72 hours, 96 hours was a huge challenge. So that's something as we talk about, and I encourage you to ask curious questions if you have them for me as well. Systemic trauma is some of the trauma that needs to be addressed with families and parents like myself and the individuals that are receiving the support if you're truly going to get to a place of healing. Some of the other pieces that had come up in my life, there were some disruptions, right? You've got your seatbelt on. So I have 4 children, one of which is not, hadn't passed away yet. I'm trying to balance many different things, work, and came to actually work at the family organization. I came to work at the family organization because I was going to lose my job in education because of the amount of time that I needed to take off, right? What was even harder, though, is that I went to a local state in Connecticut, and that's where I heard that a family organization existed. I was going to therapy for 7 years across the street from the family organization, and nobody told me that they even existed, right? So again, you work also. Do you know, and I would put out this curious question, do you know the peer-to-peer programs that you have in your communities? Not only do they, if you don't, you need to find them. And people like Fredla and other people like myself can show you how to connect. But the other piece is if you are a peer working in the community, there are so many people that don't know you. So continuing that outreach and that connection and that piece is an important piece to really shifting system trauma. The disruptions in life that came as my children continued to get older was, like I had mentioned, one of my children had passed away in hospice. It was a family member and an individual with intellectual disabilities that I considered my child, and it was not obviously planned, but it was something that had come. That was the first time in that loss that I had had two boys placed in different psychiatric hospitals at the same time. It was the first hospitalization for my middle child, who I'm going to talk a lot about with this juvenile justice story. And we're going to be shifting there, as you can see, with the felony charges coming. After the loss, that was the first impact. Then there was a divorce. And then there was, what are we going to do, right, to be able to handle this? My oldest son at the time was in a group care facility, and we were talking about transitioning home. And I had my doubts, but I had also made my promise, if you do the work and you make the work happen, you get to move home and we get to figure this out together. Unfortunately, on one of his visits, he set fire to the home at 1 o'clock in the morning. We were displaced for 9 months, and there was another trauma, right, that came up. Another disruption that I didn't plan for. At that point, we were trying to figure out different medications. Had got just after 9 months, came back into the home. My son continued to be in group care, obviously needed more support after the situation. It was also, the fire was number 8 of our abuse and neglect charges that my family received, because my children had had significant mental health and behavioral issues. There were often 51As that continued to be filed on me. And though they weren't supported, to go through that type of investigation is nothing but painful, embarrassing, and humiliating. Now, there are those situations, obviously, to file for real reasons, but children and families that have significant needs don't need another layer that comes in to judge, but need real services and supports. We had just moved back into the home and I was doing really well. We were getting things together. Things were really starting to do better. I remember this day like it was yesterday. I was a little bit younger. I think I feel that now. And not only was it a day that I had come home and I was excited, I had said to a family member that was babysitting my children, I'm going to be late. I'll be home for supper, but just make sure you don't let the kids out of the yard. They can play in the fenced in backyard. They can do everything that they need. My middle son was going through a medication change, and I wanted to make sure that I had been done. In the morning of that day, I trained 225 probation officers of what it was like to be, connected to a family organization and to support families that I had supported in the juvenile justice, though I wouldn't consider myself a juvenile justice family yet, by my definition. It was very interesting because there was lots of discussion, there was lots of curious questions, and there was also very direct questions that often is part of the work that we do, right, in teaching people. That afternoon, I left and I met with the commissioner of our youth services, and I tried to explain why I needed to have a grant and funding specifically from the state to work with families that had been juvenile justice involved. Then commissioner, have a ton of respect for her, had said to me, but I thought you were the mental health organization. Why do you want to work with our families and kids? And I said, your families and kids are our families and kids. The next question that came, well, you're not going to have the detained population families talk to the committed population families now, are you? And I remember thinking, well, in mental health, the families that have kids in psychiatric care can talk to the families that have children with school issues, because by definition, family is family and parents are parents. Why are we keeping them apart? I drove home ecstatic thinking to myself, wow, am I an advanced parent today? I have taught probation. I have met with the commissioner. It is a great day. At that point, I came home and I ended up actually going into the house really excited. Family member had left, but I remember clearly my brother had stopped by to say hello, probably to get a free supper too out of the deal. And he knew it was supper time and he was visiting. And all of a sudden, the kids were just all around and there's something seemed off, but you just never know what you don't know. There was an immediate knock on the door. My oldest son I had picked up on the way home and he was coming over for supper. He went to the door, he came back and he said, Mom, there's a really big issue. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, there's like a lot of police cars in front of the house. I went to the door, living in a neighborhood, and I will talk about my white privilege as a white family. And I ask you to sit with it as I tell you my experience so that you can understand why that white privilege is something that has will be in my story. As I went to the door, there were 3 police officers. There was a dog unit that was there, and there were people being interviewed both on my front lawn and the neighborhood across. The police officer, this wasn't his first time at my house. Remember, there was a fire, and they knew that it was a fire set by my child who was in group care. Police had been called several times prior to because I didn't know who to call when I couldn't get my child, my oldest child, out of the street when he laid down and he said he wanted to die. So the police well knew who I was. I was also not in a diverse community, so I was known probably as the 2-mom family, and there was biases and challenges there as well. And he had said there was a kid that actually threw something that hit a parked car, and they were trying to find him. Somebody had told us it was your kid. I looked at my middle son, my oldest son I knew I picked up, and I said, did you do this? And he said, no, Mom. And as a mom, I could tell there was more to the story. I told the officer no, shut the door. And I said to my child, did something happen? He said, we were just throwing this piece of metal, Mom, and it bounced and hit a car, but we all ran. It's like we didn't break the glass. And I said, okay. So I looked at my brother. A neighbor that I trusted came over. I went over to the police officer and I said, I understand something had happened and we can talk at the police station. I'm not going to do this as every neighbor is out on their lawn looking at me and looking at my children. This is where I walked into the police department and I didn't realize and I brought my brother. That was really smart. But as I walked into the police department, one of the first things that the cops said was, we can just have an offline conversation, so let's just come in this conference room. What I learned very quickly was I waived my right to recording. You don't know what you don't know and you're trying to trust. We went into that room and he explained that he did throw a piece of metal. We were willing to work with the neighbor to pay the damages. He said the damages were over X amount of dollars and we would need to pay that. Within that next week, I met with the neighbor. The charges were a little over $1,000. He did not call the police. We paid the amount of money. We wrote a sorry letter. We wrote a sorry letter to the police department. My son is 12 years old at this time, and I think that we're good to go. So let's put your seatbelt on, and we'll go to the next slide. So I get a letter in the mail that says he's been charged with a felony and I need to show to court. Now, keep in mind, I'm working for a family organization and I'm making friends in juvenile justice, so everybody's talking to me about, you got to be really careful, Mary. It's got to look different if you want it to be different. And I didn't understand what that meant. But what that meant and what people would teach me that worked in the courts, that worked in probation and worked in youth services was that your 12-year-old needs to make sure that he's clean, he's cleaned up, he knows how to say your honor, he's wearing a tie, and he's not saying anything else. They had also said, if you can bring an attorney before you go for this felony, it will make a difference. I wasn't sure how I was going to get the money for an attorney because we had just gone through all of this other stuff. This was the beginning to what I will call, though he's 12 years old, the school to prison pipeline began. There's often context. And I know somebody had put in the chat box, it caught my eye when you wrote that you were from cradle to career. We are shifting the language to cradle to prison pipeline because in Massachusetts, we're the 3rd highest state that actually expels preschoolers. So the challenges of what come often are known before age 12, right? So that's where I wanted to first highlight. So at 12 years old, and keep in mind, I am a savvy parent, so I think. I've been in the field now for a good amount of time. I've met people and they're telling me what to do. I end up calling an attorney and say, you know what, hey, so and so, would you mind going to court with me? He said, I'll only go to court with you if you don't talk to anybody until I show up. I can handle that. We end up going to court early, and keep in mind, my children, when you have children and you work in the field, and peers know this, your job really never ends. You go to the grocery store and you're doing interventions. You know, for many of you that have clinical degrees, I'm sure it doesn't end either. I'm sure you're meeting people and giving them resources, right? When you're in this field, often it doesn't stop. So I dressed my 12-year-old up. The only other time that he had been in the tie were two other situations. He got in a tie and he said, Mom, is this a fun situation at court? And I said, no, it's not a fun situation. We practiced in the kitchen. I often say he has turbo ADHD. So we had to really practice when to talk and when not to talk. As we arrived to the courthouse and we walked in, I walked in with no father figure myself and waited for an attorney. I went to check in with probation, and you may know, and this has nationally been something that has been across the country, there's something called a risk review questions that are asked within the court. The risk review questions, when it first came out, it was actually made in Massachusetts, but nationally it was endorsed by the N.E. Casey Foundation. We thought that it would help with understanding the youth that actually came up in front of court. There were concerns at the time that it would actually create more biases and challenges. It has then been looked at nationally by many, and there's questions on whether it's helpful or it actually is harmful. When the attorney arrived, he said, don't talk to anybody until I get there. So when I checked in, they said, well, we just got this quick questionnaire. I said, I'm waiting for the attorney. They said, you don't need an attorney for this. I said, well, I was told to wait for the attorney because remember, the attorney said, I will help you, Mary, but you will talk to no one. So I said, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait. Being in a diverse family where my children understand multiple languages, they're not fluent to speak, but they understand multiple languages. Their cousins are brown and black, though they identify as white. We sat and we waited for our attorney. There was a Latino boy that then went up to the counter and he went to check in. His parents or his family that he was with could not speak English, and he was talking and translating, interpreting for his family. The probation person specifically looked at the check-in and said, well, are you from this housing complex? Which is considered the projects in the city of what we're in. The young boy said no, and he continued to ask him, well, which one where do you live? Which one are you from? My son looked at me at that point, and he says, Mom, you're going to say something, right? Like, that's just not okay, Mom. You're going to say something, right? The piece that really is an impact when I talk about systemic trauma, my son was impacted by what he saw and what happened in the courts related to racism. He was impacted by a young man trying to talk to his family members and not getting the respect that we received when I went to that desk and asked questions as a white woman. Now, there was a question that continued to ask. The probation officer looked at my son when the lawyer didn't come and said, well, your dad didn't show up? And my son immediately said, actually, I don't have a father. I have a 2-mom family. So that the systemic trauma can continue to come up as things get unfolded and that young people see. And remember, he's 12, and I'm also challenged as things come as the adult that's there to support him. The lawyer came in, and when the lawyer came in, we answered the questions, but the first thing he said to me is, remember, Mary, I want you not to say 3 things before we go in. And I said, what's that? You don't mention you're an adopted family because there's biases with foster care, okay? You don't mention the medications that he's on for the mood disorder. You mention only the ADHD meds because there's bias and people don't know what they don't know. And then also, I want you to name the school that he's in but not say it's a therapeutic school. We need to normalize this as best as we can normalize it if we want the best outcome. What I didn't understand in the court is we went in after we answered those questions, and some of you may laugh at this, families do not know that they cannot go through that small bail door to the judge and have a conversation. I thought I was going to stand next to my child. So as I was traumatized in the mental health system and I didn't understand, I now became traumatized in a court system. I didn't understand that the judge wouldn't call on me, that didn't want my opinion, right? That the lawyer only would work for my child, though I hired my attorney and he was going to speak because I paid. He had to ask permission of my child to speak to me. Parents do not know what they don't know. So the question is, when you have your seatbelt on, are you ready to really ride the ride when you get into the courts? Courts are not treatment. Courts, though there are many courts that are trying to do mental health supports, juvenile justice diversion, there's great things that are happening. It's not the first place to send a kid to get the access of the community. So the question often was, where do we turn? The last thing before we go to the slide is, I had trauma at the mailbox. I had a challenge when I thought my child wouldn't come home with me. I didn't understand the alphabet soup. I didn't understand that small door that would happen. And I also did not expect to see children in handcuffs and shackles brought in that were arrested. I did not expect that. As I sat with my son and he saw that, he said to me, "Mom, are they going to handcuff me? I thought we paid the fine." So also understanding, the last thing is Massachusetts is a state that still has bail on children. Not only do we have bail on children, but if you're a child in child welfare, in foster care, child welfare can't pay the dollar bail. So now we're saying that children aren't even worth $1. It's problematic and it needs to change. So we're here together. So now we're going to go to the next slide and we're going to drive through the conditions. So those of you that are here from the courts and probation, we need you. We need you to divert as many young people as you can. What I also need you to do is sit and really be curious of the conditions that you put on children. So my child, we had all of the evidence, but we still had to return, and he needed to make sure he followed the rules put on him, and he entered probation at 12 years old. So those of you that wake up on New Year's Day and you have a one New Year's resolution and you're hoping to get through that for the year, can you imagine having 32 conditions after a 12-year-old goes to court and you need to hold it together so that you don't have to do that again? So here are some of the conditions that my child had. You need to attend school. We're going to do substance use testing on you. You need to attend therapy. You're going to attend groups. You're going to take your meds as prescribed. You're going to have anger management and control. You're going to respect all adults and parents. You're going to be responsible. You're not going to disturb the peace. You're going to have no issues with any relationships in your life. There's going to be no home challenges, and you're going to have curfew. Well, they should have put me on the conditions, because half of these conditions I got to make sure that he follows. The conditions often are so much more than what a young person can do. So as you have probably heard in other people that you've heard speak, that is often what brings them deeper into the system. Let's have less meaningful conditions that will get the individuals the help they need. So here's where I will tell you, in the attending school, if we miss the bus or the bus didn't show, who's to blame? Me, the parent, or the kid? If he's going to take anger therapy, but I have no transportation to get him there, who are we going to blame? Right? And you know what? Great point in the chat box. It's even hard for adults to do that, right? Let's really elevate and highlight that. Another piece is, do not disturb the peace. Okay. Relationship issues. How do I make sure he doesn't have conflict with his siblings? He's 12, right? But parents often don't know. And this is where I think excellent probation officers come in. You can weed through things maybe that families bring up as what is that typical sibling behavior? Remembering that the brain is not developed until 25. Somebody told me there's just a study now that says the brain isn't fully developed until 27. I believe my children are in the extended plan, just like myself in my 40s. I'm not sure I'm there yet, right? But I think it's something that we need to very much appreciate and educate all across the fields. Brain development, the ability or inability to social skills, and how do we define what healthy relationship is, right? That's another area of expertise. We're going to go to the next slide. So this mom doesn't stop there, right? Because my kids are my champions. So what am I going to do next? So here's where I am looking for the PTO meeting. I'm looking for the PTO meeting of other parents that had kids arrested. There's got to be a PTO, right, for that? I mean, where's the soccer club, right? For the kid that had to go to court and the mom that couldn't stand next to them, or the grandmother, right? I mean, these aren't my grandchildren yet. So I am searching. I'm searching for like this PTO meeting. Where do I go? What do I do? Yes, Bridget.
Hi, I'm sorry if you mentioned it earlier, but what does PTO stand for?
So it's usually the parent teacher organizations that happen in the schools. So it's a committee of parents that will come together and decide different things within the schools themselves. Great question, Bridget. So I'm looking for this parent group, right? The parent group of the 12-year-old, and you've got to have humor in this, right? The 12-year-old that has the felony charge. I can't find it. I don't know where to go. So this is where, my kid has a felony, was not arrested. I'm trying to understand the courts, and I'm well aware that when I'm in the court, there's a level of white privilege, right? Where do I find the group? I bring it to our family organization at the time. And remember, I had the conversation, so I'm continuing to have a conversation with the commissioner, and I'm trying to find a place to belong. And I'm Googling, and I'm Googling, and I'm Googling. There's another family member that I found through another family organization that wasn't in my state. And she said to me, there's this great organization called Justice for Families. So I went on the Justice for Families website, and Lori's going to give you that as a resource also today. They are an organization that I got on the plane. They told me that I was going to come to a 2-day retreat. I was given the hotel room for free, and I was going to meet other families, but they had 2 things that you had to do. Bring something that connected you to the loved one that had the felony or the arrest charge that brought you to juvenile justice, and then bring one other item of importance from your home. So I am excited. I am ecstatic. I'm getting on the plane. I'm scared to death because I wanted to meet families, right? But did I really know what I was getting into? I absolutely give a shout out to the founder, Grace Bauer, and Jeanette Bocanegra, who's the new executive director, has been an executive director to a few years. I got on a plane, went to my first meeting in Baltimore. People from all across the country, Washington State, Virginia, Oklahoma, Nevada, Ohio, Maine. There were several people that had come in. Scared to death, not sure what I'm going to say. I walk in, I'm immediately given a hug from people I don't know, a welcome, an understanding, and we have dinner together just to talk. As I'm sitting at my one table, there was 30 people there for the retreat. we go around and we're talking about how everybody was treated in the courts. The pain, the shared grief, the not expecting. How do you protect your kid? What do you do to make these supports? It was the first dinner. We woke up the next day, and what I will always give credit to Justice for Families for is I attended my first healing circle. In that healing circle that they ran, we dealt with the pain that was not dealt with over many layers of people wherever it was. I also had the pleasure, and one of my good friends today from Washington State is an individual that was in the justice system and incarcerated as an adult herself. She's a mom. She's created a very different path for her children, and she still is somebody on speed dial that I could call at any time, and she just gets it. So the healing circle and the connection with Justice for Families really was one of the biggest impact. But keeping in mind, in the beginning of my conversation, I told you I went to Connecticut to find the mental health connection for a peer-to-peer. Now I've flown to Baltimore. Not only did I fly to Baltimore, I'm in a group of family members, and two of them are from Boston. So we just flew to Baltimore to meet because there's no way to connect, right? You don't know what you don't know. So I encourage any and all of you, if you don't know Justice for Families, to know them. And another shout out to family organizations as a win-win for you all. So I do some healing. I come to a place and I learn a ton of what I'm going to do next. And I get back to Massachusetts. And I receive a $50,000 grant to do juvenile justice work with parents. So finally, I can have it happen. Christy, love the applause. I need it. You know, Washington State had things. So those of you that are in Washington, I was watching what you were doing. I was Ohio, Virginia. You've got some great work that's happening in your communities. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania's been doing some great work. I mean, a shout out to many, I visited Detroit, Michigan, Oklahoma. People are having conversations. The piece, though, that needs to happen is, do you have the families at the table? If you don't have the families at the table, we're going to talk about that in our action. So let's move on to a few detours. So we're going to talk about some repeated detours that we have on the next slide. But the way that I categorize people, myself, but the parents that we support in our organization is we have advanced families that have read, know people, know where to go, know what to do. Today, I feel like I'm an advanced family. I was in crisis this morning, but right now I'm advanced. We have a beginner family that often might know education, might know mental health, but doesn't know juvenile justice. Because you know one piece doesn't mean that you know the next piece coming. And then the third component that we identify in families is a crisis family. Because even myself as an advanced family, if I go into crisis, there are often things you just don't remember. You just don't remember where to go, what to do next. So what happens here is that my middle son, he's doing well. He's now off probation. He has no connections. But the mental health field is always talking about the fact that he's got behaviors. It doesn't go away, and he begins to get this label as a behavioral child. Now, in full disclosure, my 4 children, one passed away. My oldest child had extreme mental health with suicidal ideation and attempts by age 9. And he also had significant hallucinations in psychosis. My youngest child, as you know, has a feeding tube and Down syndrome. So my middle kid gave himself a name. He says, "Mom, am I your in the minute kid?" And I said, "What do you mean by that?" He goes, "Every time I said I need some help or I need support or I want you to spend time with me, you tell me in a minute. In a minute." The effects of my middle child, who is the father of the grandchild that I'm raising, is the child that I did not give enough attention to. He had what I called sibling spillover, if you've heard that term. He got the sibling spillover. He was left out. He was last. He created behaviors to get the attention, right? He had some learning challenges, but quite frankly, he was the easiest out of the 4 I had. So he gave himself the name, I'm the in the minute kid, Mom, because you always say in a minute. Be with you in a minute. At that point, I started talking a lot about sibling and sibling spillover. I then started realizing when he said that wow, I was a sibling. I had 5 people in my family in an alcoholic home, raised by a great grandparent at the age of 11. I was the most responsible, and I raised my two siblings towards the end that were 14 years difference. So isn't this really interesting that my oldest son represents the challenges my oldest sibling had? My middle son is saying that he's the in the minute kid that I felt I was as a child, and the trauma comes back. And the trauma comes to me. And where do I go now? So this is where, if you are supporting families, parents need the intervention as much as the children. We're a society that has data that shows if the parent is doing well, the child has a chance. But we blame the parents. We traumatize the parents, and we don't sit in the grief maybe that the parent's going through. So what can we do as a community together? So there's experience and exposure to things that you don't know that are there, right? That's a challenge. I have no clinical background or expertise, so I need to be taught about when my triggers come, not to trigger my kids. I need to be taught, well, if this happens, one of the best acronyms, and those of you that are clinical people or people within the field, my goodness, it wasn't until my kids were teenagers that anybody ever told me about the acronym HALT. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If I would have had that at age 3 or 5, my world would have been different. It's often an acronym that falls from my understanding, right? The addiction world. Like, I didn't know what I don't know. My son then goes into therapies. We've done DBT, CBT, EMDR, right? Lots of different acronyms. And I apologize that I'm not going to unfold it all. But I didn't know the therapies that would also support trauma. So I was trying to continue to find, please don't give me a sticker chart. Please don't give me a sticker chart. It didn't work for my family. That doesn't mean it couldn't work for the next. What I will tell you is that all 3 of my children need a different parenting style. They all need a different level of self-esteem building in different ways. It has been very interesting for me now to be a grandparent raising a grandchild that's 3. Also, child serving systems and adult systems are different. So prepare your young people and prepare your families. In our state, and I don't know about your state, but when you turn 18, you go to an adult system. So it's happy birthday. You're in the adult system. What does that mean? We're kicking you out of the group care you're in or the housing you're in, and you need to go to the adult system. Well, not my kid, not my family. What we do before you go to adult system is we have a vacation. And then we're going to do something fun, and we're going to put fun memories connected to transition. The transition components have been also a challenge for our family in the next steps of where we're going and what we need to do. There's also layers of loss and grief and pain that can come, and there's pieces that are there. Before we go to the next slide, I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions or thoughts, and then we're going to get into what's helpful and harmful. Any questions or need me to expand on a little bit more of an experience? Totally open. And it's okay if we're going to continue.
I'll just say that in my experience, I don't have a child who went through that, but I worked with in my organization a mom who did. And you describe so well her experiences when somebody told her to help her child be ready for court. and her child refused to be ready for court. So Pat wore a dress and she learned how to say the right things, and her daughter came in scantily dressed and swearing up a storm. And it was so traumatizing for her to go through that experience, to see her daughter behave that way. And so sometimes even experience or helping them be ready for it, they're not ready for it because they're not ready to be ready for it. So
Right.
that was really a hard lesson for her to learn.
We do have, and I will say this kind of in the helpful and harmful. I really appreciate that, Lori, because I think that um, the impact that it has in what the young people see is very different, right? Of what's there. But being also not just there to prep, but to be able to debrief with both the parents that go through it and the young people. I am a huge believer in the peer-to-peer support, because not only is it one of the most, it's impactful, um, but it also can start the healing faster when there's a peer-to-peer connection to even know what happened in that experience. So really grateful for you, Lori, to be there with her, also to kind of walk through this journey that can be hard. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next slide, which is helpful and harmful. In the courts, it can be very, so again, just using this piece, and I give credit to Youth Move, Youth Move National in this kind of piece, and our Youth Move program, Youth Move Massachusetts, is something that has really been helpful for this as well. So in the harmful piece for courts, I'll do harmful and then end with helpful. Having the judgment, the confusion, and the biases that come in court can be really hard. Not knowing who you're speaking to. So if you are in the courts, I have seen certain people, certain states have family partners or peers within the courts. Huge shout out. If you can figure out funding to have that, it can be something that can definitely help. So parent peers that have gone through the system can actually explain the court process. They could even be the people that if a family comes into court, they could welcome and explain things. What was really harmful to me was not knowing the process. I didn't have the flow chart. I didn't have the, like, where do you go, what to do. If I didn't have that attorney, I wouldn't have known. So to be able to create that and support that would be huge. What's helpful is walking through and prepping families what to expect, what to encourage, telling parents how to speak. When my colleague is on with me, Candace Gabry from PAL, and Candace and I have been to court so many times with families that literally were saying, shut your phone off, let me hold your phone, spit your gum out. Okay, let's make sure we do this just to get into the court. We're bringing fidgets that are able to have like hold on to in the court. Do not allow somebody to click a pen. Like, it's just not helpful in a courtroom. Anything that brings attention to you. We will even go as far to say to families, and hopefully this gets a chuckle from you, we need to make sure that there's some things that are covered up. So we talk about the B's. You can't have your bra showing. You can't have your belly button showing. Your bum can't be coming. Like, we just really talk. I can't have bare feet. I actually want shoes and not flip-flops. There's just a judgment that comes, and we prepare people. So we have a little fun with it, but we also talk about it with individuals. We also tell them to prep their child in saying to the attorney, if they don't have an attorney, we practice. I would like to have my parent so-and-so involved in conversation. I don't want to talk to you without my parent. The lawyers, so Candace and I on the side piece are teaching the attorneys to say to the youth, would you like your family here for this conversation? It's your choice, but you can, because youth don't know. And the attorneys have been working with us, the lawyers, and they're like, Mary, we can't demand it. So how do we say it? So they've been able to say it in a different way. Police. We tell families, so what is harmful is calling 911 and not having more people on the scene. We encourage people as a family organization, if it's a mental health or a behavioral health emergency, you call 911 and say it's a mental health. You say it's a mental health emergency. It's medical. It's a medical emergency, and it is a medical emergency because last I checked, the brain was pretty important, right? But I want more people on the scene. I don't want more unnecessary actions to Black and brown people. So I'm naming that. It is a challenge if that is the area that we need, that we are going to ask for medical support to bring more people on the scene. It brings an ambulance also on the scene, and there's that next step. What is often, yes,
Mary, can I just say
sure,
that 988 is something that is being used well throughout a lot of states, but not well through others. So I don't want to say it's a blanket
sure,
thing that's going to work. There's also the CIT officers who have been trained in critical incident training. Again, that's not a blanket for the whole country, but it is something that's happening around the country. So those are things you can ask for.
Yep. No, I think that's great, Lori. The other thing that we would say, so we are involved in the CIT crisis intervention training in our state. But what I would say, what we've learned in our state, and every state's different, right, is the 911 disability form, and you can Google this, the 911 disability form, it doesn't have mental health on it. If a family wanted to identify, just like if a family member had a child with autism or an elder person or somebody that had Alzheimer's, there is a 911 disability form that you can print out and you can let the police know that you have a child or a loved one in your home. It is a slippery slope and every family needs to do what's best for them. I have been educated by many families on why that would never happen in certain communities. So I would say be cautious, be informed, and make an informed decision. The other thing that I will say, Lori, to your point on the CIT team or CIT training, one of the biggest pieces that we've learned is that we are trying to get legislation right now through our state where it's a mandate training that CIT happens in every department and brain development training happens in every department. We have been successful across the state from state police and local police in doing brain development training. We have not been as successful in getting CIT training in every area. So that's something that, again, it's really important. Lori's got a great point. You don't know until you ask. So to ask both from a community end and ask what type of training, and then is there an offer that you could offer as well in that collaborative piece? Many departments follow different rules of what they can and cannot do. There's different policies. Many of you also know that family, family dynamics, I put in there as a piece. I think it's often something that will come up as far as who can come. We've noticed since the pandemic, courts are actually doing more online with families, and more families are able to do that. I would also, though, make a shout out. There are a lot of families that don't have that level of good internet, depending upon where you live and what is there. So it's something, again, of what's helpful and harmful. So we're going to go into getting the work done, and then I'm going to go into just a snapshot of data for Massachusetts. So we're going to go to the next slide. So one of the terms that my oldest child came up for whenever he needed additional psychiatric support is he didn't like the word illness, so he doesn't want to be told that he has a mental illness. He has mental health. He has mental wellness, but he doesn't have illness. He connects the word himself, illness, to cancer and not going to make it. So what he will say to me is, if things are going well with his not going well with his medications and we need an intervention, we often use the term, we need a tune-up. We need a little bit of a help once we're going next. Pal also uses the word tune-up when we see decisions coming down from the court by certain judges, by seeing different conditions that happen across the state. Maybe we need to have a tune-up of a conversation of what's best for families, right? To have honest conversations. So I would say it's really the professional end. It's also the personal end of where you go next. The next piece that I would say is individually, state, and national work. It's eye-opening to me in one of the resources that you will receive called unlock it. It's called the unlock. I call it the unlocking report, families unlocking futures, solutions to crisis in juvenile justice. That is the first report that was ever done and written where families were asked for feedback. Nationally, it wasn't until 2009 that national folks brought families with juvenile justice to the table. It wasn't until 2012 where people that had loved ones with substance use were brought to the table to ask about their journey. So it's interesting to me if you really think about this, right? In the 1950s is when we started breaking down in the intellectual disability or developmental disability world institutions. 1950s. We didn't pull families together till 2009 for juvenile justice to hear what's going on and how's it working or not working. So it's something to really keep in mind that nationally there's attention to this, but it's a long overdue attention. So I'm excited, as Lori mentioned, like there's been more conversations in juvenile justice. We got to keep having them. Because remember, my kid that had mental health didn't need to get here. So what do we need to do together? Statewide, I can tell you we really appreciate working with our youth service partners. Their goal is to just shut down and not be needed. That is how they start their day and their meetings, is that we're okay not existing if children don't need to come into detention. I was fortunate enough that my child did not go into juvenile justice, but the challenge that happened was at 18, he had picked up a charge and he was incarcerated for the first time. Transitional age supports, reminding again that the brain isn't developed until 25. It's a huge challenge when you have an 18-year-old that is incarcerated and again doesn't know that next step. The other piece, so they did use his juvenile justice record against him. It was not closed. Thank you, Chandra, for that question. It is something that we're working hard with to have closed situations. Not only did that come up for him then, the fact that he was a young father continued to be brought up, and that's where it was brought up that he was an adopted child in the courts. So it's been layer after layer after layer of not getting out of and getting the support that he's needed. There's also a big piece, knowing your state's legislative priorities. What is there, what is not there. I encourage anyone and everyone to look at different states. I'll do a shout out to Ohio, has some great diversion programs. We've stole from them. I think it's called borrowed. But we've borrowed from Ohio on some of the diversion programs that they've done. We do not want young people to go deeper in the system. In our state, and we'll see some data, but in our state, the other piece that often comes up too is that if there's a relationship issue or a domestic assault within the home, sibling to sibling, you can be arrested on a domestic assault, even if the parent doesn't want there to be a charge, or the person that's in the home hits the parent. There can also be a domestic assault. We have a diversion right now in our state to have those children not go deeper into the system and to be diverted with a wraparound approach. Some of you are from System of Care, that wraparound approach of support before going in deeper to the system. Another piece is that I will tell you, whether you're a peer on this call or a professional, we need you to show up to meetings of juvenile justice. The only way to do this impact of change is for many of you that are here that want the change and remembering you did not create the system. The system was created and we need to break it down and rebuild it. And I would say also rebuilding it into the communities of support and really looking at the impact that it has and what's happened. Massachusetts does have some lessons. It matters who's in the seat as at commissioner levels and state level. It's really important to create a way to get the right legislators to do the policies. We've seen that, we know that nationally, whether it's LGBTQ rights and other rights that are being looked at in different states. Though Massachusetts feels like a progressive state and we love to brag about our sports teams and our laws and openness, racism is real. Racism is rapid. We did a report that specifically asked brown and black families how long they waited at the emergency department. White families were given water in a glass of water, a bottle of water in a chair, 3 times more than a brown and black family. When we brought the data up to the state, it was shocking that this was the surprise that was there. Racism does not only happen in the justice system. It is problematic everywhere. And our goal and my goal is to name my white privilege and name my white privilege in order to get to this next step of what to do. It is not, both in my professional and my work and my personal life, I continue to speak up loudly and forcefully as a white woman on behalf of the racial and ethnic disparities. And that's something else that I think really, we need all of you to be part of that effort. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot, a dashboard of data and kind of where race and equity is. You'll see on the far left the arrest rate percentages for white, black, Hispanic, and Asian families, young people, what our arraignment data looks like, our probation, detention, and our committed rate. I would encourage you all to watch the race and equity conversation in changing the term, but the problem still exists. Watch it and ask for it everywhere. Watch how it's actually being collected. Are families and young people identifying themselves or professionals identifying them? It skews the data. We learned within our state that was part of, we had to ask the right questions for the information to be collected the right way. We also know, just looking in this data, right, the amount of black youth, that the arrest rate, we were able to identify police departments that if my child, as an example, was white and Candace had a black child, my white child in some areas got to court quicker, so they weren't held overnight, than a black child from that same community. So the data will unfold the stories of what all of you had in order to make the most impact. It's something that I would encourage you to ask questions for, curious questions, right? We also know that the school to prison pipeline, we just finished a summit in our state, the School to Possibility Summit, which was held virtually with over 300 people that attended, but it was a highlight on specific schools. We know that a risk factor that can get you into juvenile justice is having a learning disability. But what we also know is that a child that has literacy issues is going to be more at risk in entering juvenile justice as well. Now, I want to tell you, my children and my family have been involved in every single system except our youth services system. No one ever talked to me about literacy. It was never mentioned. So watching and testing children at a young age in literacy, if you represent any state agency, any community organization, I would love if you would channel me this week and in 5 meetings, you ask about the literacy level of 5 children and families that you support. As a parent and a grandparent, I'm going to do it better. I'm going to do it different, right? I know I looked at the report card and I was like, let me just get this through. I know for Candace, she questioned her own child and she'd be okay with me sharing this in her literacy level. And it wasn't until almost middle school diagnosed with dyslexia. We know that youth that are brown and black are diagnosed even less than children that are white for literacy and learning disabilities. So I encourage you again to really find and question that. But if you could channel me this week and ask about literacy with families and young people, I would love to be with you in all your states. Also, just keep in mind, mental health, social skills, and that trauma lens is going to be huge. The trauma component is an extreme impact that we're going to definitely look at. So we have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to just do a quick group activity. And then it looks like, Lori, we can end with a few slides. And any questions, please put them in the chat box, raise your hand. I am totally with you. Okay. So this activity, shout out to Kathy Wright, who is also a juvenile justice advocate. If you're from New Jersey, I'm bringing New Jersey in the house with us today. Jeanette was in from New York City, right? I brought her name up. Many other states. Kathy Wright gave PAL the opportunity to do an engagement series with providers, and she trained us as a family organization in this piece. So shout out to the New Jersey Parent Caucus, Kathy Wright, who is the executive director. So we do an activity in our state and with organizations, and we talk about what family interaction is, what family involvement is, and what family engagement is. And it's really interesting. So I'm going to give you just a snapshot situation. And it's around juvenile justice, and juvenile justice, you know, there's a group of families and there's a community organization that's together. You are hoping to have a policy day. And in order to have this policy day, you need to create a flyer. You need to pick a day of the week, the time and location of where to have that. I would love to hear either in the chat box or unmute. How are you going to determine what you put on the flyer? I'm looking in that chat box, and I'm not calling on Candace. Okay, how many of you are just going to Google images and put an image on that flyer? Where are you getting the picture of the flyer? Quiet group. Okay, so Brenda wants the accessibility of the location and the time that would work the most. Okay. Christy says, I support alternative peer groups for teens with substance use issues. Okay. So Christy, I don't know if you can, Christy Taylor, I don't know if you can unmute, but how are you creating those flyers?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I'm not working on any flyers. I just wanted to bring up that treatment and support model.
Okay, great. So you're going to get as many families, diverse families to attend as brought up by Sharon. So here's where I'm going to walk you through this quick, okay? Because I know it's getting towards the minute here where we can just go to the next piece. So many families will create, yes, Melody, right? You're creating them on the computer. I'm with you, right? Canva, Raquel, right? Huge piece.
Yes.
Canva's a big piece. If you don't know it, get to know it. I'm not an expert at it, but I appreciate the people around me that are. So one of the things when doing this activity, most providers will say that we're going to create the flyer, we're going to hand them out, we're going to get a family to hand them out. What I want to stop and pause for a minute is that the first step of that staircase is you need to get a family member that you interact with that is able to give you feedback. You will never get to true family engagement if you don't know how to interact with families. Okay? So the families, though you might be making it on the computer, Melody, you really want to figure out what family member that you are connected with is going to review it, give feedback, or make it. Right? You're going to interact. Do you think anybody's going to attend for this?
Right. That's why community input on anything is so important.
It is. And keeping in mind that, Sarah, great shout out, right? Community of family voice, peer voice, what does it look like, is extremely important. The next piece is that you're involving family members, right? What are the policies that they want to talk about? Is it the policy that Brittany wanted to talk about, or Raquel, or Tony, or James? If it's not that policy that they're concerned with or they're invested in, it is not truly going to be a family engagement event. So for those of you that are trained in the wraparound principles, I love all of you, and I want you to know that culturally competent is a step that if you're not culturally comfortable, you're never going to be competent. I truly believe I'll never be competent because I'm always going to continue to learn. The same goes for the savvy word that we use in the community called family engagement. I encourage you all not to give the term family driven, family navigator, or family partner if it's truly not a family member. You've got to be very careful of the terms that you put together in order to do that next step. And if you are a family navigator, but you don't have lived experience in that, you just have to tell people that, right? Because certain states use certain things as far as language. So to really keep the connection to what it is. So the involvement is going to be important, but this is what I say in the interaction. If you do not have good interactions with families, you're never going to get involved. You're never going to get to involvement, and you're never going to get to family engagement. So you need to be able to have eye contact with families. And this sounds silly, but I've had more conversations with probation and people in the courts and people in psychiatric hospitals that say, I need you to say hello to me. I need you to have eye contact. Hand me that glass of water. Ask me what's working or not working. You're involving. And then you're engaging people to come. How are they getting there? Are you having the foods that are familiar with the cultures that you're supporting? What is the transportation like? What are the barriers like? You need to be able to pull the families in together if you would love to have the expertise that I'm bringing to you today. You can't do it alone. And if you weren't told you can't do it alone, I'm telling you, you can't. You need to have the peers, the people with the lived experience, and all of that connection directly with you. So as we continue, we're going to go to the next slide. This is what PAL has created. Free to anybody and everybody on our website. Take it, steal it, run with it. I don't know, mention PAL once in a while or say Mary might be helpful too. We have created family-driven tip sheets. So we have had families help us write the tip sheets in family language. They are used by the professionals as much as they've used by the families. What to expect when you bring your child to court, when you're calling 911. And the last one to the right is a tip sheet that we did with our Mass Hospital Association in Massachusetts. And it was the best practices of emergency rooms. Our emergency room boarding situation has been a challenge. We have kids waiting way too long and even more complicated. So in my last slide, I'm going to give you my contact information, and I'm just going to highlight us as we end and hand it back over to Lori. My name is Mary Viano. I had the honor to be with you all today to share my impact, my family story. I will tell you that my oldest son is living in an apartment and alive today and doing really well. He is also a person that advocates in the community and tries to get the support that he needs. I will tell you that my middle son was just released from prison in a state other than the state I live in. And reentry doesn't happen the way it needs to happen to get people back into the community. I continue to hold hope. I continue to bring his story. He knows that I'm talking today on his behalf of our story in his words. My daughter is doing well in a sassafras as anybody could be, and keeps me on my toes at 24. And the last piece that I will mention is I've been given the gift, and I'm grateful every day, to having a 3-year-old that I'm raising. I brought him home from the hospital, and every day he gives me the strength to do better, know better, ask questions, and to teach. But what I will tell you is in the 20 years of being connected to systems, child welfare is difficult. And we need to do better in child welfare to keep families together. It is considered kinship. He will be with me forever, but it is a connection that's there. So on behalf of my children and families, I need your champions, like all of you, to be in the field. Reach out if you need anything. Happy to support. And my last shout out to Justice for Families for having the biggest impact, and PAL having an impact. And the last one, we couldn't do this without Fredla. So a shout out to Fredla, both Lori and Pat Hunt and her team. So I'll hand it back over to Lori. Thank you.
So much, Mary. That was awesome information, and thanks for being so willing to share your experiences and your vast knowledge in this. This page will give you some of those resources and that website to Families for Justice for Families, and it's an awesome website, and you should go and learn more about it. And these are actually resources that she gave to me, Jeanette Bocanegra from Justice for Families. So that please take your time and look at that. Any comments or questions? We really have very little time, but if you're willing or want to, please put it in the chat and I will try to address it. Even afterwards, I can reach out to you if there's something that you need more information about. Want to thank or remember next month, I thought it was interesting that Mary brought up siblings, because we're going to be talking to the Sibling Support Project next week, because our siblings are the ones who are going to be with our kids for the very longest. And we need to know how to engage them as part of a whole family, because it's important. We don't want to be the in-a-minute child. We want to be part of what's going on. And so thank you for bringing up siblings and the importance of sibling support.
Will these slides go out because we can't click on the links from here?
No, yeah, you will get the slides.
Perfect.
If you'll
Thank
see,
you.
you'll get a follow-up email that gives you that that certificate of completion, a link for the recording of this webinar, and these slides. So you'll get these slides in person, so you'll be able to click on them when you get them.
The beauty of modern technology.
I know, isn't it amazing? Isn't
The
it
silver
amazing?
lining of COVID.
So here are all of the social networks for NTAC. And again, these will all be in your slides. This is, we need to hear from you. It helps us in preparing these presentations and knowing what you want us to present. So if you have any ideas of what you would like for us to present, please put that in the chat, or make sure you say that on the eval that I think I saw that Bridget put it in our chat already, but you'll get another copy of that link. So please make sure you hear it. Here's the contact information for NTAC. If you need any technical assistance or need help in any way, we're more than happy to reach out to you. They will, if you reach out to NTAC, they will send it to whoever you need help from, and then we'll reach out to you and help you. And then SAMHSA, this is their mission, and we're grateful for their funding to help out with this as well. So again, thank you so much, Mary, and thank you all for participating and being here with us on a regular basis. We appreciate you so much, and we'll see you next month at the Sibling Support Project presentation. So thanks again, Mary. Everybody have a great day.